Hi guys, let me know if the audio and all is coming fine. So yesterday we did up till page 70 of this paper discussing the exodus of Nepali Hindus from Bhutan in 1990 and the entire early 90s. Today we will do a bit of a recap because all the crazy in the beginning of the paper there was a lot of just legal jargon discussing the constitution. Or they don't have a constitution. Bhutan does not have a constitution. Bhutan runs according to the whims of the king. So we discussed in the first almost half of the video last day about just what are the premises of what are the laws that they applied, what were the excuses they used to kick out the Nepali Hindus, and we realized that they don't have any excuse. They just kept changing their citizenship laws and the requirements and the criterias for citizenship after every 10-15 years, and even after creating a law they retrospectively use and apply a law that they hadn't even made back then. They changed the law that they made 20 years and they say that yeah, that's going to that the law from 20 years back is going to apply differently today. So all sorts of crazy things we discovered in the second half of the paper, and that's where we are going to start it. We did up till page 70. We will start it from about page 68 or something. Check it out. So the paper is called, let me know if the audio is fine. So the paper is called the exodus of ethnic Nepalis from southern Bhutan. We have all these. See the last 4 papers. We are going to discuss all of them. If this paper does not seem sufficient, maybe sometime other than this we will discuss all the papers as well, because this issue needs to be highlighted, because we found out some absolutely crazy things which are just short of being a Holocaust. Otherwise, it on theory, on paper, it seems like a description of Hitler's actions against Jews. Exodus of ethnic Nepalis in Bhutan. This is by, yeah, this is the paper we read yesterday. Audio is fine. Okay, thank you. Yeah, the National Assembly, Royal Advisory Council, Local Administration. They have nice names for all of their all of their government bodies, but they don't function. Nationality Law of Bhutan. Okay, so from here we got this is the criteria they created for the different kinds of citizenships. F1, F2, they gave names for. F1 was for people who are genuine Bhutanese citizens. F2 was for returned migrants. F3 for dropout cases. Dropout cases are people who are not around at the time of the census. F4 is a non-national woman married to a Bhutanese man. F5 is a non-national man married to a Bhutanese woman. F6 was adoption cases, children who have been legally adopted. F7 is for non-nationals, that is migrants and illegal settlers. Now the funny part is that they did not have a home ministry until 1968. Okay, but they thought that they can. But from the 50s, they decided that they keep coming up with the idea that they need a census. That's the gist of it. So although the way in which the census was conducted varied in different areas, some districts and villages are said not to have experienced the complications and harassments that others did. Some places were harassed, some places did not get harassed. The census ran into controversy almost immediately. Not only was there no clear indication given by census officials about the implications of being placed in any of the 7 categories, there were also consistent reports that the census was being carried out in an arbitrary fashion. That is the basic gist of this entire paper, that we will realize that everything they did up till the exodus in 1990, 1991, everything was arbitrary. And mysteriously, around 1990, even the Kashmiri Hindu exodus happens. So, who knows if there's a connection. There were also consistent reports that the census was being carried out in an arbitrary fashion, and that the standards being applied for proof of citizenship were unduly rigorous. Now, unduly rigorous seems like something applicable to India as well. कि क्यों कागज मांग रहे हो? But when we get into the meat of the matter, when we get into the details and nuances, you'll realize that this situation is nothing like the Indian CAA situation, nor are the retaliations from the government nothing like the Indian situation. We will read a little later that even petitions were declared seditious and those people were arrested and tortured. In accordance with the 1985 Citizenship Act, the census required ethnic Nepalis to provide documentary evidence of their residence in the country in 1958. Okay? The standards set for proving residence were extremely strict, and in some areas, no account appears to have been taken of the difficulties that the production of appropriate documentation would pose for a largely illiterate people in a country that has only recently adopted basic administrative procedures. उसके पहले administrative procedure ही नहीं था. पॉपुलेशन इलिटरेट है 1950s में. ऐसा नहीं है कि इनके पास राशन कार्ड है, आधार कार्ड है, पैन कार्ड है, जनधन अकाउंट है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है. उससे बोल रहा है कि 100% पेपर दिखाओ कि तुम 1958 में इस देश में थे. ओके. In some cases it has been suggested that appropriate documentation simply would not even exist. अगर वो सचमुच भी 58 से है, उसके पास डॉक्यूमेंट रहना भी इम्पॉसिबल था, बिकॉज इट हैज ऑल्सो बीन पॉइंटेड आउट, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, दैट द होम मिनिस्ट्री डिड नॉट एग्जिस्ट अंटिल 1968, एंड दैट प्रायर टू दिस सेंसस रिकॉर्ड्स वर हेल्ड बाय विलेज हेडमैन, गांव का मुखिया, who did not keep accurate and comprehensive records. Although comprehensive systems for enumeration in the census records only date back to 1972, it was only 1977 that proper documentation providing proof of payment of land taxes was instituted. That was in 77. Furthermore, in some districts and villages, no provision was made for village elders and headmen to vouch for people they knew to be citizens, but who lacked the relevant paperwork, as had been permitted in the past. तो देखो, पहली बात तो ये है कि विलेज का हेडमैन मुखिया खुद बोल रहा है, जिसके पास रेस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी था वो खुद बोल रहा है कि नहीं भाई ये तो सिटीजन है. तो पहले का लॉ में बोल दिया गया था कि यस ओके विलेज हेडमैन कैन से. अब जाके बोल रहा है कि नहीं, विलेज हेडमैन को भी बोलने का अधिकार नहीं है. तो दे कीप चेंजिंग देयर लॉज अकॉर्डिंग टू देयर विम्स आफ्टर एवरी 10-15 years, as had been permitted in the past. Census teams are also said to have refused to accept as evidence of residence relevant documentation for the years prior to 1958. अच्छा, अब accusation ये है कि census teams refused to accept evidence of residence जो कि 1958 से पहले का है, वो भी नहीं देख रहा है. Even those ethnic Nepalis who were able to produce what they believed to be evidence of their eligibility to be granted F1 status, which is the normal Bhutanese citizenship, they were exempted under the very strict guidelines used by census teams. Many ethnic Nepalis who possessed citizenship certificates issued by district officials under the provisions of the 1958 nationality law found their documents to be declared null and void unless they could produce documents proving at least residence and often land ownership prior to 1958. जो कि 58 का दे रहा है, उससे बोल रहा है कि 58 का पहले का दो. Others who possessed the citizenship identity cards that had begun to be distributed following the previous census were similarly classified as non-nationals or illegal immigrants. Many refugees have complained that they provided relevant documentation. It was frequently seized or confiscated by the census or other local officials. ये सब इंडिया में कहाँ से हो रहा है? बाकी ये भी हम कल भी डिस्कस कर रहे थे. I'm saying this for whoever was joining just today, that if a Westerner or anyone who does not understand or know the history of India, who is not an insider to the Indic ethos or the Indian ethos even, they will read these papers from a third person perspective, from a so-called objective truth lens, and they will think that yeah, this is kind of similar to what's happening in India. But when you get into details, you'll realize that it's nothing like what's happening in India. This is more akin to what happened in Nazi Germany, or what Islamic countries do to their dhimmis, etc. Even they don't really kick out their dhimmis. They just keep their dhimmis as dhimmis. They kick out their dhimmis only during partition, etc. Many refugees have complained that they provided relevant documentation. When they provided relevant documentation, it was frequently seized or confiscated by the census or other local officials. Even when people were able to supply the documentation required, refugees in Nepal complain that impossibly strict standards were set for their acceptance. For example, some said that documentation was rejected for minor spelling differences, or because middle names were spelled out on one document and were given simply as initials in another. Okay. If anyone has any query or concerns about why is this different from what India is doing, just wait and watch what we are going to read in the next 2 pages, and you will realize this is nothing like what India has operated like, what the Indian government did during CAA. Refugees report further that the results of the categorization were liable to change. Okay. रिफ्यूजी बोल रहे हैं कि रिजल्ट्स ऑफ द कैटेगराइजेशन वो भी आर्बिट्रेरीली चेंज हो रहा है क्योंकि राजा है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन उसका है नहीं. इन मोस्ट केसेस फैमिलीज वर एडवाइज्ड ओरली, सिर्फ वर्बली बोल दिया कि ऑफ द डिसीजन कि अच्छा तुम सिटीजन हो कि नहीं हो. एंड डिस्पाइट बीइंग एडवाइज्ड इनिशियली दैट देयर सिटीजनशिप हैड बीन कंफर्म्ड, इन सम केसेस दे वर सब्सिक्वेंटली टोल्ड दैट दे हैड बीन डिक्लेयर्ड इलीगल इमिग्रेंट्स और नॉन नेशनल्स. सो यू सी, इतना जो 10-15 साल से बार बार लॉ चेंज किया है, ये सब लॉ बेसिकली एक्सक्यूज है टू किक आउट हिंदू नेपालीज, और कोई इसका रीज़न नहीं है. वैसे और एक एक्सक्यूज था नेपालियों को निकालने का कि नेपाली को भूटनी लैंग्वेज जोंखा सीखना होगा, भूटनीज ड्रेस पहनना होगा. नेपाल के साउथ भूटान में जहाँ पे नेपाली हिंदू सबसे ज़्यादा है, वहाँ पे स्कूल से नेपाली लैंग्वेज सिखाना बंद कर दिया. यह हमने कब किया है? टोल्ड दैट दे हैड बीन डिक्लेयर्ड इलीगल इमिग्रेंट्स और नॉन नेशनल्स. जिसको बोल दिया गया कि हाँ तुम सिटीजन हो, उसको रैंडमली बोल दिया कि तुम सिटीजन नहीं हो, अब निकलो. डिस्पाइट द प्रॉब्लम्स एसोसिएटेड विद द सेंसस, द गवर्नमेंट हैज गिवन नो इंडिकेशन दैट इट विल बी डिसकंटिन्यूड. ये 1995 का रिसर्च पेपर है, तो उस वक्त बोला जा रहा है कि सो फार द गवर्नमेंट हैज नॉट गिवन एनी इंडिकेशन दैट ये बंद होगा. इन लेटर in late October 1993, there were reports that the administration had begun evicting alleged कहाँ गया पेपर? Evicting alleged non-nationals detected in Chukha district, and it was announced that another census in Samchi district was to be carried out. 3 months earlier, the Home Minister estimated that the census would be continuing until at least 1998. अब देखो भूटानाइजेशन पॉलिसीज में क्या क्या होता है. ये कौन सा पेज है? वी डिड टिल पेज 70. ये कौन सा पेज है? अरे ये फुल स्क्रीन करने से पेज नहीं दिखाता है. पेज दिख रहा है? हाँ, ये पेज 66 है. ठीक है, अब देखो, as we turn the pages here, it will get crazier and crazier with every turning page, and during page 69 and 70 you will absolutely lose your mind that you don't know about this. And thanks to the guy who is commenting here, see the profile called Wonderful Life, that is the person who recommended this paper. Okay, he is the son or daughter of such a victim of this exodus himself or herself. Okay, now देखो भूटानाइजेशन पॉलिसीज क्या है, and see how the hell can anyone think that this is similar to what India did during CAA or NRC. There is no doubt that the census caused considerable anxiety among the ethnic Nepali population in southern Bhutan. But this was not the only concern of ethnic Nepalis in the late 1980s. The government also introduced a series of policies as part of the promotion of the distinct national identity and the One Nation, One People theme of the 6th 5-year plan, aimed at instilling a greater sense of unity among the population as a whole. I have a problem with every sentence spoken in this, every part of this sentence. Okay, पहली बात तो ये है कि वन नेशन वन पीपल तो ठीक है. वन नेशन वन पीपल का मतलब ये कैसे हुआ कि डाइवर्सिटी खत्म कर दो. दे एक्चुअली वांट द डेथ ऑफ डाइवर्सिटी. वी ऑल्सो एवरी कंट्री वांट्स वन नेशन वन पीपल. दैट डजंट मीन यू फोर्स पीपल टू वेयर द सेम क्लोथ्स, स्पीक द एग्जैक्ट सेम लैंग्वेज. नेशन स्टेट तो है नहीं भूटान, वो किंगडम है, सिविलाइजेशनल स्टेट है, हिंदू बुद्धिस्ट सिविलाइजेशनल स्टेट है, बॉर्डर्स पोरस है. इसको कहाँ से अचानक एक दिन सुबह उठ के लगा कि आज एक रेशियली यूनाइटेड नेशन स्टेट बनाते हैं. They force people to forget their languages. स्कूल में नेपाली पढ़ाना बंद कर दिया. उसका अगला चीज देखो, इससे पता चलता है कि ये कितना चुतिया गवर्नमेंट है. ठीक है, थीम ऑफ द 6th 5-year plan. पहली बात तो ये है कि आज के 2023 में कोई अगर इंडियन है जो कि 90s बॉर्न है या 80s बॉर्न है, उसको पता चलना चाहिए कि 5-year प्लान कितना घटिया प्लान है. ये प्रशांत चंद्र महालनोबिश, एक बंगाली इकोनॉमिस्ट था, नेहरू का एडवाइजर, उसका आइडिया था, जिसके वजह से 1991 तक इंडिया का इकोनॉमी का एकदम सत्यानाश होकर रखा था. Even we were taught about the brilliant 5-year plans even in our environmental studies classes in when I was in class 9-10. Even back then, that was in 2007-8. 2007-8 तक 5-year plan पढ़ाया जा रहा था, जो कि फेल हो चुका था 1991 तक. और ये भूटान 6th 5-year plan कर रहा है. 6 5-year plan हो जाने के बाद भी उसको समझ में नहीं आया कि 5-year plan काम नहीं करता है. बिकॉज तुम 5-year plan बनाओगे कि अच्छा ये करेंगे, उसके 1-2 साल में पूरा दुनिया का इनोवेशन, टेक्नोलॉजी, इकोनॉमी सब कुछ चेंज हो जाएगा. तुम्हारा 5-year plan के जगह रह जाएगा. सिर्फ ब्यूरोक्रेट तुम्हारा 5-year plan का इंप्लीमेंटेशन करने का सैलरी लेके इंग्लैंड में घूमेगा जाके. Bhaskar Upadhyaya, my family was also part of the exodus. Holy shit. I am also Nepali speaking. Damn. They see our traditions as a threat. Yeah, and for no apparent reason. That's another point why this situation is nothing like what the Indian situation. Why the hell would Nepalis threaten the safety of Bhutanese, ethnically Bhutanese citizens? What motivation do they have? What incentive do they have? What funding do they have? Yesterday I was talking to a friend who was kind of defending the idea that, Maoists are kind of like freedom fighters, doesn't it seem so? That anyone who picks up arms against the state for the good of their people. I was saying, see, what's the basic argument of Kashmiris and Maoists? That they don't have money to buy food because they are so oppressed. AK-47 का पैसा कहाँ से आ रहा है? And generations के बाद generations. जो 14 साल के उम्र में माओइस्ट हुआ था, वो उसका उम्र 80 साल हो गया, अब भी उसके पास AK-47 का पैसा है, खाने का पैसा नहीं है. तो फंडिंग जो आ रहा है बाहर के देशों से, ये फंडिंग कभी गरीब हिंदुओं को कभी रेबेलियन करने को नहीं मिलता है. ना इंडिया में मिलता है, ना कश्मीर में. कश्मीर तो इंडिया में ही है, ना कहीं पे भी मिलता है, ना श्रीलंका भी मिला, ना भूटान में भी मिला, ना बांग्लादेशी हिंदुओं को मिलता है. तो they are always sitting ducks. But we are supposed to think that this is equivalent to India's situation in terms of CA. Okay, unity among the population as a whole. Whether or not this was the true intention of the authorities, the policies have had a very different result. In practice, the measures, which include the requirement that southern Bhutanese wear traditional northern Bhutanese dress and the withdrawal of the Nepali language from school curriculums in the south, engendered a growing sense of anxiety, resentment and alienation among the ethnic Nepali population, culminating in unprecedented demonstrations in the south of the country in late 1990. अब ये डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन का थोड़ा मैं पहले बोल देता हूँ कि कल मैंने ये पढ़ के रखा है. डेमोन्स्ट्रेशंस में थोड़ा बहुत क्या हुआ कि नेपाली हिंदू थोड़ा सा प्रोटेस्ट वगैरह करने लगे विथ नो आर्म्स. फंडिंग कोई तो करने का है नहीं. वहाँ इंडिया में तो है नेहरू का गवर्नमेंट. ऐसा नहीं है कि यहाँ के हिंदू उनको थोड़ा सपोर्ट भेजेंगे. नेपाल में भी किंगडम है, वो भी सपोर्ट नहीं भेज रहे हैं. तो ये लोग क्या करते हैं, थोड़ा पहले पिटिशन देते हैं. पिटिशन को सेडिशियस घोषित कर दिया जाता है. उसके बाद ये लोग थोड़ा इधर उधर आग वाग लगाते हैं रास्ते पे, जो कि इंडिया में कोई भी छोटा मोटा पार्टी अगर 6-7 घंटा का स्ट्राइक भी करे तब भी जितना थोड़ा हंगामा होता है उतना हंगामा किया, उससे ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं कर पाया. इन जनवरी 1989, the king issued a decree which required all citizens to observe Driglam Namza, the traditional northern Bhutanese code of values, dress and etiquette. The most controversial element of this was the requirement that everyone wear the traditional costume of the Drukpa people. For men, this means wearing the gho, a one-piece tunic, while women have to wear a kira, a one-piece dress. Clothes commonly worn in the north. North Bhutan का culture South Bhutan पे थोप दिया जा रहा है, but seldom seen in the south of the country. इसलिए ये सब पेपर जो पढ़ते हैं इसलिए उनको लगता है कि हाँ, this is similar to the Indian North India South India divide. The introduction of this requirement was regarded by ethnic Nepalis as a clear attack on their cultural identity. Resentment quickly grew as the policy was implemented. On-the-spot fines or imprisonment for a week were the penalties for failure to comply with the new dress code. वो ड्रेस कोड फॉलो नहीं किया तो फाइन होगा. ये देखो इम्पोजिशन जो बोलते हैं ना, नॉर्थ इंडिया का कल्चर इम्पोज हो रहा है, साउथ इंडिया में कोई हिंदी नहीं बोलेगा तो उसको जेल में डाला जा रहा है. On the spot fines for or imprisonment for a week were the penalties for failure to comply with the new dress code, and the police, who were permitted to keep 50% of the fine as an incentive to enforce the policy, did so rigorously. तब तो पुलिस के पास ये इंसेंटिव है कि अच्छा अगर कोई दिखे जो कि नेपाली ड्रेस नहीं पहना है तब भी उसको जेल में डालेगा, ये बोल के कि हाँ पहना था, नेपाली ड्रेस पहना था, क्योंकि उसके पास तो अभी ऑपरेस करने का झूठ बोलने का इंसेंटिव दे दिया है कि हाँ 50% ऑफ फाइन तुम रख लो. जो प्रॉब्लम हम इंडियन पुलिस से सेपरेट करना चाह रहे हैं, वो राजा खुद वहां पे वो प्रॉब्लम डाल रहा है पुलिस में कि नहीं तुम रख लो फाइन का पैसा. The government has since accepted that the policy was overzealously applied, and enforcement of the decree has since become lax. Okay, lax का नमूना देखते हैं बाद में. Since become lax, although it is still being observed during office hours in southern towns like Phunsholing and Gelepuk. Phunsholing is one of the most popular tourist spots in Bhutan. Concern among ethnic Nepalis about the threat to their cultural identity implied by the application of Driglam Namza, that code of etiquettes, was heightened still further in February 1989, when the Nepali language was removed from the curriculum in schools in the south of the country. ऐसा रिमोटली ऐसा चीज कहाँ पे हो रहा है इंडिया में, और ऐसा रिमोटली ऐसा चीज कोई सोचने का भी कहाँ प्लान कर रहा है इंडिया में, ये बताओ. द डायरेक्टर ऑफ एजुकेशन claimed that the decision was taken on purely educational grounds. हाँ, ये अभी एक्सक्यूज सुनो. In response to a UNICEF report, UNICEF में कौन सा भोसड़ी वाला ये रिपोर्ट बना है पता नहीं है. Everywhere it's a taken for granted consideration that when you know more than one language your brain functions better. तुम्हारा ब्रेन का एक्सरसाइज ज्यादा होता है, ब्रेन का न्यूरोट्रांसमीटर ज्यादा अच्छा काम करता है. ठीक है, यहाँ पे यूनिसेफ बोल दिया कि क्योंकि वहां के बच्चों को नेपाली, जोंखा, इंग्लिश ये 3 लैंग्वेज सीखना पड़ रहा है, इसके वजह से इट वाज हैम्परिंग देयर ओवरऑल लेवल्स ऑफ अचीवमेंट. ये पहले तो यूनिसेफ का ये कसूर है. फिर अगला सवाल है कि ये एक्सक्यूज दिखा के नेपाली उठा दिया. अच्छी बात है, एक्सक्यूज मिल गया तो क्या है. Nevertheless, the timing of the decision ensured that it was perceived as a further attack on ethnic Nepali southern Bhutanese culture. लैंग्वेज सिखाना बैन कर दिया. और इंडिया में जोंखा सिखाया जाता है. डू यू नो, नॉर्थ ईस्ट के स्कूल्स में जहाँ पे मैं पढ़ता था, वहाँ पे खासी, जोंखा, खासी तो इंडिया का लैंग्वेज है, ठीक है, वहाँ पे जोंखा पढ़ाया जाता है. वहाँ का जोंखा टीचर भूटानीज गवर्नमेंट फंड करता है. भूटान गवर्नमेंट sends their Zonkha teachers to our schools so that Bhutanese children can come and learn Zonkha while studying rest of India's education system, studying in India's education system. And we don't, still till date we don't have any problems with Nepal or Bhutan. They are sending their kids here, they are sending their Zonkha teachers here, they are learning Zonkha here, fine. But these people had prevented Nepalis from learning the Nepali language in their own country. एथनिक नेपालीज. ओके, अब थोड़ा बहुत रेस्पॉन्स बाय द एथनिक नेपालीज, और ये रेस्पॉन्स में क्या क्या हुआ, वहां से थिंग्स गेट रियल डार्क. एज द सेंसस वेंट ऑन एंड द भूटानाइजेशन प्रोग्राम्स कंटिन्यूड, unrest grew as a result of what was perceived by the population in the south as an attempt by the government to oust ethnic Nepalis and impose an alien culture. The widespread anxiety about the census was formally voiced in a petition to the king, submitted in April 1988 by 2 southern Bhutanese members of the Royal Advisory Council, Teknath Rizal and BP Bhandari. Now, Teknath Rizal and BP Bhandari are the guys fighting on behalf of the Nepali people in Bhutan. Now, they just submit a petition which gets termed seditious, and then they are thrown in jail. And you'll realize how Teknath Rizal is basically a hero of the story as far as I've read in the paper so far until yesterday. The petition raised concerns about the way in which the census was being carried out. ये खुद रॉयल एडवाइजरी में काउंसिल में बैठे थे, तो उन्होंने पिटिशन दिया कि ये गलत हो रहा है. The petition raised concerns about the way in which the census was being carried out and about the retroactive application of the 1985 Citizenship Act, and urged the intervention of the king to remedy the situation. Far from achieving the desired result, the petition was declared seditious. The petition was declared seditious and against what? The Sa wa Sam. What is that? The 3 elements of the king, country, people. उसके अगेंस्ट एक सेडिशन है, ये घोषित कर दिया गया वो पिटिशन को. Teknath Rizal was briefly detained and census operation continued as before. Teknath Rizal was sentenced to life imprisonment in November 1993. 3 days after he was sentenced, he was granted a pardon by the king. However, the pardon is conditional on the governments of Bhutan and Nepal resolving the issue of ethnic Nepali southern Bhutanese refugees living in refugee camps in Nepal. इस बेसिस पे इनको छोड़ दिया गया for the time being there. Now Rohan, you are saying that make shorts out of this. You can also make shorts out of this, hopefully. Tatva Bodhaka, namaste. Why so early today? Why so early? Because this paper is very important. ताकि और लोगों को भी पता चले, इसलिए. ओके, अब देखो, अगर इंडिया सच में हिंदू राष्ट्र होता तब होपफुली ये सब हम प्रिवेंट कर सकते थे. भूटान इतना छोटा कंट्री है, उसका पुलिस कितना और आर्मी कितना, ठीक है. वहाँ पे अगर नेपाली हिंदुओं पे हाथ उठता है तो हमको बोलना चाहिए था कि अरे भाई ये सब बंद करो, नहीं तो हम तो उठा लेंगे तुमको. पूरा भूटान का भूटान एक इंडिया का स्टेट बन जाएगा. तो वो तो नेहरू से हो नहीं पा रहा था. नेहरू को कश्मीर में क्या हो रहा है पता नहीं है, उसको भूटान में क्या हो रहा है कैसे पता होगा. और 1990s में तो नेहरू है भी नहीं वहाँ पे, तो इंडिया का ही सत्यानाश बना के रखा है. क्योंकि अब जो ये लोग बोलते हैं बाहर वेस्ट वाले के इंडिया में इलेक्टोरल ऑटोक्रेसी चल रहा है और फिर डेमोक्रेटिकली इलेक्टेड है मगर मोदी खुद डेमोक्रेट नहीं है. ये सब चुतिया तब तो नहीं था. तब तो ऐसा था कि हाँ 50 पार्टी मिलके कोलिशन बना के गवर्नमेंट बना दिया 6 महीने के लिए, 3 महीने में प्राइम मिनिस्टर बदलो, हर 3 महीने में प्राइम मिनिस्टर बदलो, ये सब हो रहा था. तो उसका एडवांटेज लेके कश्मीर में भी वो एक्सोडस चल रहा था, भूटान में भी एक्सोडस चल रहा था. सब कोई मजा ले रहे थे. जबकि इंडिया हु कुड हैव बीन द बिग ब्रदर, who could have been the elder brother, carefully and calmly making people understand these things, that don't do this to our people, you are part of our civilization. उसका खुद का प्राइम मिनिस्टर चेंज हो रहा था हर 6-7 महीने में, क्योंकि वहां पे तब इलेक्टोरल ऑटोक्रेसी नहीं था. ओके, तो अच्छा, तो अभी टेकनाथ रिजाल को बेल देने का सोच रहा है. नेक्स्ट सी व्हाट हैपेंस. The disaffection among ethnic Nepalis also resulted in the politicization of at least a small sector of the ethnic Nepali population, and various political groups were formed both in Bhutan and in Nepal, which set up discussion groups and circulated anti-government literature. तो अब थोड़ा बहुत resistance बन रहा है नेपालियों की तरफ से. One of the first of these was the People's Forum for Human Rights (PFHR), established in Nepal by Teknath Rizal and others in July 1989. And you'll have to understand how racist this is. This is not entirely religious, okay? क्योंकि ये जो नेपाली population को भगा रहा था भूटान से, उसमें से एक fraction of a minority was Buddhist. उसको भी एक साथ डाल के भगा दिया. उनको बस racially non-Bhutanese नहीं चाहिए, ये है उनका आइडिया. CA is not based on race. Exactly, Nazi Germany was based on race. This is based on race. ये किसी को पता ही नहीं है. पता है इसलिए पेपर लिखा है मगर मेन स्ट्रीम में नहीं है ये न्यूज. Which set up discussion groups and circulated anti-government literature. One of the first of these parties who were causing the resistance was the People's Forum for Human Rights (PFHR), established in Nepal by the hero Teknath Rizal and others in July 1989. By early 1990, discontent was widespread in the south of the country. South of Bhutan में ही नेपाली लोग ज़्यादा रहते थे. In the south of the country, and the government began to attribute criminal acts to people whom the government labeled nolops or anti-nationals. अब ये कोई white westerner या communist पढ़ेगा और देखेगा कि अच्छा वहाँ पे भूटान में नेपालियों को एंटी नेशनल बोला जा रहा था और यहाँ पे भी कुछ लोगों को एंटी नेशनल बोला जा रहा है. इसका मतलब तो सिचुएशन एकदम सेम है. कोई अंदर घुसेगा नहीं एग्जैक्ट डिटेल्स पढ़ने को. इनिशियली देयर एक्टिविटीज वर रिपोर्टेड टू हैव सेंटर्ड ऑन एक्सटॉर्शन एंड द स्ट्रिपिंग ऑफ पीपल वेयरिंग नॉर्दर्न भूटानीज ड्रेस. तो ये रिटेलिएशन में ये करने बैठ गए कि अब जिसको भूटानीज ड्रेस में दिख रहा है उसको स्ट्रिप करो. फ्रॉम मिड 1990 द सो कॉल्ड लैटिन एंटी नेशनल्स सेड बाय द गवर्नमेंट टू इंक्लूड मेंबर्स ऑफ द भूटान पीपल्स पार्टी. ये लोगों ने क्या किया? आर alleged to have engaged in more serious crimes such as the murder and kidnapping of civilians, including census officers and other government officials. ये जो unprovoked attack था on Nepalis, now they are giving back. अब ये रिटेलिएट कर रहे हैं. यहाँ पे तो कुछ नहीं हुआ, सब कुछ हमेशा ही कोई ना कोई रिटेलिएट करने का एक्सक्यूज दे रहा है. In September and October 1990, resentment of government policies erupted in a series of unprecedented public demonstrations throughout the south by thousands of ethnic Nepalis. The demonstrations, which in some districts continued for days, were reportedly organized by the BPP together with the PFHR and the Students Union of Bhutan. Although in the main peaceful. अब तक बोल रहा था कि अनप्रेसिडेंटेड डेमोन्स्ट्रेशंस है, अब देखो कि बोल रहा है कि मेजरली पीसफुली था ये. ऐसा अनप्रेसिडेंटेड डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन है कि वो मेजरली पीसफुल था. यहाँ पे अनप्रेसिडेंट डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन जो नहीं है, जो कि वीकेंड का किसी का 6 घंटे का स्ट्राइक है, वो भी इससे ज्यादा वायलेंट होता है. और हम उनको इंटरनेशनल नहीं बोल सकते क्योंकि वहां पे भूटानी लोग नेपालियों को इंटरनेशनल बोल दिए थे. They have used the same lexicon, so Indians can't use the word international against anyone. Although in the main peaceful. तो exceptions क्या था? Mainly peaceful था. अब exceptions पढ़ते हैं. There were incidents involving material damage and violence. देखो, anyone who lives in India knows that this is a weekend thing for any random small party who calls a 6 to 7 hour strike. Such as the destruction of census records. census office में जाके वो पेपर जला दिया. And the stripping of local officials wearing ghoes. North Bhutanese का जो कपड़ा है वो फाड़ दिया. The government responded by calling the protesters anti-nationals who were guilty of treason. तो ये ठीक है. अब देखो मार जब पड़ता है तो कैसे रिस्पॉन्ड करते हैं. पहले पिटिशन को सेडिशियस बोल दिया, एंटी-नेशनल बोल दिया. अब जब एक्चुअल वायलेंस हो रहा है, काइंड ऑफ थोड़ा बहुत अनप्रेसिडेंटेड डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन हो रहा है, उसको भी अब एंटी-नेशनल बोलने का अलावा क्या रखा है. अब क्या करोगे? This is why don't use big terms for small incidents. पिटिशन को इंटरनेशनल बोला था, अब देखो जब कपड़ा वपड़ा फाड़ा जा रहा है उसको भी इंटरनेशनल ही बोल रहा है. सो द फ्रेज इंटरनेशनल लूजेस इट्स वैल्यू. International should have been saved for people who want to break up Bhutan, want to set up a parallel government in Bhutan, who say that this part of Bhutan needs to be given freedom, आज़ाद भूटान चाहिए. ये सब बोलने वाले लोग इंडिया में हर गली में रहे, इसलिए हम उनको इंटरनेशनल बोलते हैं. हमारा मेन स्ट्रीम कवि, लिटरेटर, पोएट, ये सब लोग मेन स्ट्रीम न्यूज़ में जाके बोलते हैं कि हाँ अगर वहाँ के लोगों को अलग देश चाहिए तो दे देना चाहिए. ऐसे चूतियों को हम इंटरनेशनल बोलते हैं. यहाँ पे कोई पिटिशन डाल रहा है कि अरे भाई मुझे नेपाली सीखना है, मैं नेपाली हूँ, मुझे नेपाली कपड़े पहनना है, इसको इंटरनेशनल बोला जा रहा है. द गवर्नमेंट रिस्पॉन्डेड बाय कॉलिंग द प्रोटेस्टर्स एंटी-नेशनल्स हु आर गिल्टी ऑफ ट्रीजन and banning the BPP, accusing it of responsibility for violent attacks on people and property, जो कि इंडिया में हर रोज का काम है. Compare this with India repeatedly and compare this with Nazi Germany. सिर्फ एक चीज नहीं किया, नेपालियों को गैस चेंबर में नहीं घुसाया, उसको निकाल दिया देश से. एक सिर्फ डिफरेंस है from Nazi Germany, from what Bhutan kingdom did. Okay. अब देखते हैं इंटरनेशनल एक्टिविटीज है क्या. फॉलोइंग द डेमोन्स्ट्रेशंस, वो जो अनप्रेसिडेंटेड वायलेंट डेमोन्स्ट्रेशंस था, देयर वर इंक्रीजिंग रिपोर्ट्स इन द कंट्रीज ओनली न्यूज़पेपर, क्वेंसल, ओनली न्यूज़पेपर. अनदर रीजन टू कंपेयर दिस फकिंग सिचुएशन विद इंडिया. ओके, इंडिया में देखो कितने सारे न्यूज़पेपर्स. इंडिया आई थिंक हैज द हाईएस्ट नंबर्स ऑफ न्यूज़पेपर्स इन सर्कुलेशन इन द एंटायर वर्ल्ड. वहां पे कितने लोग कितना डाइवर्स ओपिनियंस देते हैं, अच्छे बुरे सब कुछ. और यहाँ पे एक न्यूज़पेपर था. 68 में होम मिनिस्ट्री बना, 58 में बोलना शुरू हुआ कि कागज दिखाओ. जो कागज दिखा रहा है 58 का, उसको बोल रहा है कि 58 का पहले का कागज दिखाओ, और उसका है न्यूज़पेपर एक. Following the demonstrations, there were increasing reports in the country's only newspaper, Queensel, of criminal acts being committed in the south of the country, attributed to anti-nationals. These ranged from murder, kidnapping and rape to threats to local officials, harassment of teachers and students, and robbery and assaults on civilians. In addition, the so-called anti-nationals were blamed for attacks on property in the south of the country, including schools and private homes. अब ये थोड़ा प्रेमिस सेट हो रहा है. ये हमको अभी भी लग रहा है कि ये एक्यूजेशन है कि ये नेपाली प्रोटेस्टर ये सब कर रहे थे. उसके बाद हम देखेंगे कि एक्चुअली डेटा शोज दैट दे वर रैंडम थीव्स गोइंग अराउंड taking advantage of this riotous situation. वो लोग जाके ये तोड़फोड़ कर रहे थे. There is no actual concrete proof that the actual Nepali protesters were doing these things. It is generally accepted that a wide range of crimes have been committed in southern Bhutan since the beginning of the unrest. In some cases, so-called anti-nationals do appear to have been responsible for these acts. However, it is by no means clear that government opponents are to blame in all cases. The opponents of the government, that is the Nepali protesters. They are not to be blamed for in all cases. And the governments claim that so-called most of the terrorist raids are being carried out by terrorist groups sent from the refugee camps in Nepal. this claim is not substantiated. और ये टेररिस्ट का डेफिनेशन भी पता है भूटान के गवर्नमेंट को? ये टेररिज्म है. कौन टेरराइज हो रहा है? इंडिया में रहने दो एक हफ्ता, टेररिज्म क्या है पता चल जाएगा. In fact, as the US Department of State points out, it appears that a large number of the attacks the government has identified as incidents of terrorism have in fact been the work of criminal gangs taking advantage of unsettled conditions on the Indo-Bhutan border. इनका काम था. और ये थोड़ा बहुत सेंसस डॉक्यूमेंट्स जला देना, ये बोल रहा है कि टेररिज्म हो गया. Okay guys, check out the comment section. They are giving their life details कि क्या क्या हुआ है उन लोगों के साथ. Bhutani okay, my other monitor is very far away, so I'm sorry I can't read your surname. Okay, it's probably Dilli Prai. Okay, thank you for joining the live stream. I have lots of other papers to discuss. We will continue this conversation in other live streams also. Okay, next consequences of the demonstrations. अब ये जो resistance हुआ उसका consequences देखो. अब देखो नाजी जर्मनी किसको बोलते हैं, टेररिज्म किसको बोलते हैं, सेडिशन किसको बोलते हैं, अब पता चलेगा. आर्बिट्ररी अरेस्ट, इल ट्रीटमेंट एंड टॉर्चर, ये अब तक इंडिया में कहाँ पे हुआ है? एक्सेप्ट कश्मीर में, अफ्सपा में, जो कि अलग अलग देश मांग रहा है. यहाँ पे नेपाली कहाँ अलग देश मांग रहा था? जब सीए हुआ तब ये सब कहाँ पे हुआ? पीसफुली बैठ गए, रास्ता वास्ता ब्लॉक करके 2-3 महीने के लिए, कोरोना आया, सब अपने अपने घर चले गए. एक पानी तक भी छिड़का नहीं गया उन पर. In the aftermath of the demonstrations, there were consistent reports of widespread human rights violations, including arbitrary arrest, ill treatment, torture committed against ethnic Nepali southern Bhutanese. Anyone suspected of involvement in or support of the so-called anti-national activity was a target, as were the families of the people thought to have been involved in protest of any kind. उनके families को के साथ भी ये सब किया गया. और ये एक phrase देखो यहाँ पे उसके पिछले पैराग्राफ में कि मोस्ट ऑफ द टेररिस्ट रेड्स आर बीइंग कैरिड आउट बाय टेररिस्ट ग्रुप सेंट फ्रॉम रिफ्यूजी कैंप्स इन नेपाल. अच्छा, इसको लग रहा है कि नेपाल भेज रहा था टेररिस्ट. नेपाल का और बहुत पैसा है नेपाल के पास, वो 90s में टेररिस्ट भेज रहा था भूटान में बवाल करने के लिए. ओके, anyone suspected of involvement in or involvement in the support of anti-national activity was a target, and their families families of people who are thought to have been involved in protest of any kind. In some cases, the violations were simply carried out in retaliation to the protests. In others, the violations जो human rights violations है वो कभी कभी रिटेलिएशन टू प्रोटेस्ट हो रहा था, प्रोटेस्ट किया इसलिए वायलेशन ऑफ ह्यूमन राइट्स कर दिया, जो कि इंडिया में कभी होता नहीं है. यहाँ पे रिटेलिएशन ऑफ प्रोटेस्ट. in other situations, the violations, the human rights violations or the threat of the human rights violations, ऐसे भी बोल भी रहा था क्या ह्यूमन राइट्स वायलेट कर दूंगा, ये भी ऐसा थ्रेट भी था कि टॉर्चर कर दूंगा. The threat of such appears to have been deliberately aimed at forcing ethnic Nepalis to leave the country. Amnesty International reports that from late 1990, raids on the homes of Nepali speaking southern Bhutanese became common. तो एमनेस्टी इंटरनेशनल को आज लगता है कि सारे दुनिया में सिर्फ मुसलमानों को बहुत प्रॉब्लम है, सब प्रॉब्लम मुसलमान को हो रहा है, और किसी को प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, और किसी का हिस्टोरिकल डिसएडवांटेज नहीं है, किसी के डिसेंडेंट्स को कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, किसी के एंसेस्टर्स को कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं था. अभी कल डिक्लेयर हुआ कि सैन फ्रांसिस्को में हर ब्लैक आदमी को, हर ब्लैक ह्यूमन बींग को जो कि आइडेंटिफाइज एज ब्लैक, जिसके लीनियज में अगर 2-3% भी ब्लैक हो, उसको $5 मिलियन मिलेगा ऐसे ही, क्योंकि उनका एंसेस्टर्स के साथ खराब कुछ हुआ था. Compare that with Nepali Hindus or any Hindus of anywhere or Jews. Who doesn't deserve $5 million then? In others, the violations or the threat of such appears to have been deliberately aimed at forcing ethnic Nepalis to leave the country. Has Bhutan ever apologized for this or reparation देने का कभी सोचा है? Bhutan should give reparation to Nepalis. Amnesty International reports that from late 1990s, raids on the homes of Nepali speaking southern Bhutanese became common. ऐसे ही common हो गया. During the raids, families were questioned about their involvement in the protests. Page turn करने दो. हाँ. The involvement in what? Involvement in the September 1990 demonstrations, about their links with the BPP. Suspects were arrested. Those detained were held in poor conditions, either at the district jail or local schools. All schools All schools in the south were closed following the demonstrations and many of them were converted into army barracks. साउथ भूटान के स्कूल को आर्मी बैराक बना दिया. पढ़ना नहीं है, वैसे भी नेपाली नहीं पढ़ा रहे थे, अब छोड़ो, पढ़ाई भी छोड़ दो, हम उसको आर्मी बैराक बना देते हैं. स्कूल वूल जाके क्या होगा. All schools in the south were closed following the demonstrations and many of them were converted into army barracks or detention centers. Detention center क्या है? Concentration camp. क्या डिफरेंस है नाजी जर्मन के साथ? कि गैस चैम्बर नहीं बनाया, और कोई डिफरेंस नहीं है. टॉर्चर भी किया. And kept for periods, they were kept in those detention centers for periods ranging from 1 week to 12 months without charge or trial. क्राइम क्या है? मुझे नेपाली सीखना है अपने स्कूल पे, मुझे नेपाली कपड़े पहनना है, ये है क्राइम. Upon release, former prisoners report being warned against involvement in the so-called anti-national activity and threatened with rearrest. Others say that they were released only on condition that they leave the country. ये है एक्सोडस का डेफिनेशन. यहां पे रहना है तो नेपाली भूल जाओ, भूटानीज कपड़े पहनो, नहीं तो निकलो. Which is the same as Raliv Galiv Jaliv. I will kill you in prison by torturing you, or you have to leave or stay here and convert to the Buddhist the Bhutanese identity. पूरी तरह से रेशियल सुप्रीमेसी का काम हो रहा है यहाँ पे, और सबको लगता है कि पूरा रेसिज्म सिर्फ न्यू दिल्ली और न्यूयॉर्क के रास्तों पे होता है. यहाँ पे कोई रेसिज्म नहीं है. दिस इज 100% बेस्ड ऑन रेस. The paper, the researcher, the scholar herself or himself does not mention the word religious exodus or racial exodus for once. This is their problem. They will use these words only for India and USA. If this is not racism, what is? रेस के बेसिस पे ही निकाला जा रहा है. Others say that they were released only on condition that they leave the country. In some cases, the government is said to have arrested and ill-treated prominent figures in local communities to intimidate others into leaving the country so as to avoid a similar fate. For example, following the refusal in late 1991 by the inhabitants of Lamidara in Chirang district to leave the country, 3 respected community figures were arrested and tortured. जिसको भी पकड़ रहा है, अरेस्ट कर रहा है और टॉर्चर कर रहा है. It always gets to torture. Following this, some 500 households in Lamidara, almost the whole population, filled out emigration forms. Okay, we give up, we are leaving the country. Many of those detained were ill-treated and tortured. जो कोई भी थोड़ा बहुत भी अरेस्ट हो रहा है वो सीधा टॉर्चर तक पहुंच रहा है. Many of the detained were ill-treated and tortured, and several prisoners are reported to have died in detention. Died in detention. Torture होते होते मर गया detention में. अब ये गैस चेम्बर में नहीं मरा, टॉर्चर में मरा. ये भी और डिफरेंस भी क्या है? गैस चेम्बर में मरने से क्या क्या अलग होता? गैस चेम्बर में फिर भी पीसफुली मरता, यहाँ पे टॉर्चर होते होते मरा. इसका नंबर्स जूस के जैसा नहीं है, मगर अदर देन दैट इट्स एग्जैक्टली लाइक नाजी जर्मनी. इट्स रेशियल. It harms a population which was not harming the country, and it tortures and kills people without trial in detention. All these 3 are criteria of Nazi Germany which are being filled by the Bhutanese government. How are they any different? And no one knows about this. And several prisoners are reported to have died in detention during 1991 as a result of ill treatment or torture, or due to receiving either inadequate medical treatment or no treatment at all for illnesses contracted during imprisonment. Imprisonment के वक्त ही जो disease हुआ उसका भी treatment नहीं दिया गया. In a survey carried out in the refugee camps in Nepal between May and July 1993, 95 male torture victims confirmed. 95 male torture victims. ऐसा नहीं कि एक दो के साथ by chance हो गया था. 95 male torture victims confirmed that severe beating and kicking was the most common method of torture. क्या गलती है? नेपाली लैंग्वेज क्यों बोला? नेपाली कपड़ा क्यों पहना? नेपाली तू भूटान में है कैसे? तू नेपाली है, भूटान में क्यों है? ये पता चला 100-150 साल भूटान में रहने के बाद अचानक एक दिन इसको लगा कि नेपाली है, क्यों यहाँ पे रहेगा, निकालो इनको. Beatings were frequently carried out with bamboo canes or wooden sticks, but also with iron rods, electric wire, belts, whips, rifle butts, bayonets. Bayonets, do you know? Bayonets are banned in warfare these days because it's so brutal. जो लोग युद्ध करते हैं उनको भी बैंड है, bayonets नहीं यूज करना है. और वहां पे विदाउट ट्रायल नेपाली प्रोटेस्टर्स वर बीइंग हिट विद bayonets in prison for 1 week to 12 months. Bayonets, roots of trees, thorn branches. The men also described being subjected to a variety of other torture techniques as well as cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. अबू ग्रेब प्रिजन का बारे में सबको पता है, ये किसी को नहीं पता है. From the evidence, it appears that abuse by government forces peaked during the 18 months following the September 1990 disturbances. Amnesty International, जिस भोसड़ी वालों को आजकल कुछ नहीं पता है, सब अत्याचार सिर्फ मुस्लिम और ब्लैक्स के साथ हो रहा है, सिर्फ अमेरिकन ब्लैक्स के साथ हो रहा है, ये लगता है एमनेस्टी इंटरनेशनल को. उसको तब ये सब पता था, आज चुप बैठा है. Amnesty International points out that the reports of gross human rights violations declined significantly from about mid-1992 onwards. The findings of the survey appear to bear this out, with 86 of the 95 torture victims interviewed claiming to have been tortured during 1990 and 1991. Okay, turning the page. ये वेबसाइट में पेपर टर्न करने में थोड़ा टाइम लगता है. Okay, following the demonstrations, another form of gross human rights abuse being perpetrated was rape. अच्छा, ये कल तक नहीं पढ़ा था हमने. Following the demonstrations हो गया था. डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन के बाद क्या क्या टॉर्चर हुआ हमको पता चल गया. बोला गया कि अगर रहना है तो ये टॉर्चर फेस करना होगा, टॉर्चर नहीं फेस करना है तो देश से निकलो. ये सब बोल दिया गया फॉर द क्राइम ऑफ बीइंग नेपाली. No other reason. Nepalis were not demanding a separate state. They were not demanding a separate country. They were not saying that Bhutan से चाहिए आज़ादी. इसके बाद following those protests, another form of gross human rights abuse being perpetrated was rape. Amnesty International reports have been received, having received numerous allegations of rape of women by army personnel. Some of the victims are said to have died as a result of being raped. Other human rights violations. For approximately 18 months after the demonstrations, ethnic Nepalis were at the greatest risk of gross physical abuse. Experience of such treatment or the threat or fear of being subjected to it was commonly cited by refugees who left the country during this period as the primary motivation for doing so. Since then, the level of serious physical abuse has declined significantly. हाँ, क्योंकि abuse करेगा किसको? सब तो निकल गए देश से. अब्यूज करने का कोई बचा नहीं देश में, उसकी वजह से बोल रहा है कि अच्छा थोड़ा कम हो गया था अब्यूज. Since then, the level of serious physical abuse has declined significantly, although cases of torture and ill treatment in police stations and prisons in the south continue to be reported. तो ज़्यादातर लोग चले गए देश से, बचा कम, इसलिए कम अब्यूजिव चीज़ें हो रहा था, मगर जो भी रह रहे थे उसके साथ भी हो रहा था. This is a statistical clarity. This shows that बचा ही था तो कम लोग, और अगर कम लोग बचा है और ये लोग बोल रहे हैं कि अब्यूज कम हो रहा था, इट मीन्स दैट हुएवर वाज स्टेइंग बिहाइंड वाज आल्सो बीइंग अब्यूज्ड. तो अब्यूज कौन नहीं हो रहा था? कोई भी नहीं. एवरीवन वाज बीइंग अब्यूज्ड. The level of serious physical abuse has declined significantly, although cases of torture and ill treatment in police stations and prisons in the south continue to be reported. The arrest of ethnic Nepalis also continues, albeit on a much smaller scale. But refugees state that many of those who are detained are released only after specifically agreeing to leave the country. फिर से यहाँ पे रहोगे तो टॉर्चर हम करेंगे, टॉर्चर नहीं सहना है, निकलो देश से. This is the basis again. As of late 1993, in spite of the release in amnesties of over 1,500 suspected government opponents, about 200 so-called anti-nationals were still in detention, pending trial on charges related to political unrest in southern Bhutan. During their visit to Bhutan in October 1994, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention visited Champang Central Jail, which then held 148 prisoners. Of these, 36 had been convicted under the National Security Act 1992. जो एक्ट इनका भूटान का, अभी अगर हम पेपर कोई पढ़े तो हमको पता चलना चाहिए कि एक्ट वैक्ट कुछ नाम का कुछ चीज़ नहीं है. उनको जब 5-10 साल के अंदर कुछ नया दिमाग में आता है राजा का, वो नया लॉ बना लेते हैं, क्योंकि उनका कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है ही नहीं. उनका होम मिनिस्ट्री ही नहीं था 1968 तक, मगर बोल रहा है कि 58 से तुम भूटान में हो, इसका प्रूफ का डॉक्यूमेंट दिखाओ. होम मिनिस्ट्री नहीं है, उसके 10 साल पहले का डॉक्यूमेंट दिखाना है. तो इनको अगर कोई एक्ट बनाया भी है, कोई ऐसा चीज़ जस्टिफाई करने का, वो भी हिलाडियस है, वो भी लाफिंग स्टॉक है, क्योंकि एक्ट उनको बनाना है एकदम रैंडमली, राजा बिस्तर से उठ के कोई भी एक्ट बना सकता है। क्योंकि जो कोई रॉयल एडवाइजरी काउंसिल में थे वहां के 2 नेपाली जब पिटिशन दिए, पिटिशन को ही सेडिशियस बोल दिया, तो ये एक्ट का क्या मतलब है? 51 वर चार्ज्ड विथ हैविंग कमिटेड ऑफेंसेस अंडर द एक्ट एंड द अदर 61, ये एक्ट सिर्फ बाहर के देशों को दिखाने के लिए एक्ट नाम दिया है उसका, वैसे है ये राजा का विम्स, राजा या जो भी गवर्नमेंट चला रहे थे, राजा और उनके हेल्पर्स वगैरह। एंड अदर 61 वर अवेटिंग कमेंसमेंट ऑफ प्रोसीडिंग्स अगेंस्ट देम अंडर द एक्ट। द वर्किंग ग्रुप रिपोर्टेड दैट in the course of its interviews at Champang Central Jail, it found that in many instances people had been detained for years without having been charged, and that persons who had been charged had not been brought before a judge or trial. Detained for years without having been charged, and persons who had been charged had not been brought before a judge or trial. In most instances, those charged did not know when they might be tried. This gives enough excuse, इससे बहुत कम चीज करने की वजह से यूएसए जाके इधर उधर जाके बोलता है कि फ्रीडम देखो, डेमोक्रेसी देखो। India should have taken some steps to handle Bhutan. In the main, however, और उसके बदले में इंडिया के नॉर्थ ईस्ट के स्कूल्सों में जोंखा लैंग्वेज पढ़ाया जाता है, भूटान के एमिसरीज, भूटान के टीचर्स आके पढ़ाते हैं यहाँ पे जोंखा। इन द मेन, हाउएवर, द मेथड्स ऑफ परसिक्यूशन ऑफ एथनिक नेपालीज हैव चेंज्ड, वेयर प्रीवियसली दे वर एट रिस्क ऑफ आर्बिट्ररी अरेस्ट, इल ट्रीटमेंट एंड टॉर्चर इंक्लूडिंग रेप। फ्रॉम अबाउट मिड 1992 ऑनवर्ड्स, एथनिक नेपालीज वर increasingly coming under different forms of pressure to leave the country. Reasons for departure now more commonly cited include forcible eviction, the destruction of houses, and harassment and intimidation by local authorities. अब जेल में मारना बंद हुआ, मगर रहेगा कहां? घर वर तोड़ दिया, घर से ऐसे ही निकाल दे रहा है कि अगर तुम देश में रहोगे यही होने वाला है, ये पसंद नहीं आ रहा है तो देश से निकल जाओ। ये उनका थ्योरी था। Reasons for departure now more commonly cited include forcible eviction, destruction of houses, harassment, intimidation by local authorities. This despite a royal decree issued in January 1992 making it a criminal offence to force any genuine citizens to leave the country, and reports that some district officials in the south have been persecuted for intimidation and corruption. अच्छा, अब राजा बोल रहा है कि नहीं नहीं ऐसे मत करो। एटलीस्ट ऑफिशियल लेवल पे ये बोला है कि ये सब मत करो। कुछ लोगों को नाम के वास्ते डिटेन भी कर दिया ऐसे करने के लिए, कुछ गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल्स को। मगर ये सब चल रहा है, कैसे चल रहा है? वो राजा है, राजा के अंडर में राजा को ना मान के कोई काम कैसे कर सकता है? सो दे ऑलरेडी हैव टैसिट सपोर्ट। किसी ना किसी तरह से राजा उसके पास मैसेज भेज रहा है कि ऐसा करो, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है। और क्या कारण हो सकता है? राजा का तो ऐसा नहीं है कि वो बीबीसी का डॉक्यूमेंट्री देख के डर जाएगा। राजा तो राजा है, उसका बात कोई डिसोबे कैसे कर रहा था? दिस डिस्पाइट अ रॉयल डिक्री इशूड इन जनवरी 1992 मेकिंग इट अ क्रिमिनल ऑफेंस टू फोर्स एनी जेन्युइन सिटीजन्स टू लीव द कंट्री। ये सब बाहर के देशों को दिखाने के लिए ऐसा रॉयल डिक्री विक्री दिया। वैसे भी उसका रॉयल डिक्री का कोई मतलब है नहीं, फिर 3 दिन बाद और एक रॉयल डिक्री बना देगा कि नहीं निकालना है सबको। द कंटिन्यूइंग डिनायल ऑफ पब्लिक सर्विसेज, increasing depopulation in the south of the country, and the wish to be reunited with family members who have already left the country are also reasons for departure given by refugees arriving in Nepal. The census operation, which is continuing in southern Bhutan, is another reason why ethnic Nepalis are still leaving the country. ये 1995 का रिसर्च पेपर है, उस हिसाब से सोचो। It's still continuing in southern Bhutan is another reason why ethnic Nepalis are still living the country. क्या रीजन है कि वो अजीब व गरीब सेंसस ऑपरेशन 1995 में भी चल रहा था। Refugees interviewed by Amnesty International in November 1993 reported that the census continues to be carried out unfairly and improperly and described a variety of abuses associated with the census. These include the confiscation of citizenship identity cards and land tax receipts, and being threatened with imprisonment or a fine or failure to leave the country within days of a negative citizenship decision being made. Acha, if someone's joining the live stream right now and thinks that, yeah, these seem to be a legitimate reason, you'll have to go back to the start of the live stream and realize and understand why this makes absolutely no sense in the context of Bhutan in the 1990s, okay? 68 तक इनका होम मिनिस्ट्री नहीं था, कोई डॉक्यूमेंट्स नहीं था, फिर बार बार 10-15 साल में लॉ चेंज हो रहा था. आई एम जस्ट रिकैपिंग दैट. द सेंसस ऑल्सो कंटिन्यूज टू बी कैरिड आउट आर्बिट्रेरीली. वो पहले भी आर्बिट्रेरी था, अब भी आर्बिट्रेरी है, इसमें और नया क्या है? फॉर एग्जाम्पल, one refugee reported being classified as a non-national simply because his parents and brother had left the country. माँ बाप और भाई देश छोड़ के चला गया, इसलिए छोटा भाई भी इलीगल इमिग्रेंट है. आई एम टेलिंग यू, जो लॉ एक्ट वैक्ट बोल रहा है वो सब सिर्फ एक्सक्यूज है, एक्सक्यूज के अलावा कुछ नहीं है. इसका सिर्फ मेन मोटिव है कि हम रेशियली सुपीरियर है, भूटान भूटानियों के लिए है, नाम के वास्ते जो भूटानी है, और बाकी सबको निकालना है देश से. उसके लिए एक्ट चाहिए तो एक्ट बना देंगे, एक्ट नहीं चाहिए वैसे भी डिटेन कर लेंगे. सिर्फ रेशियल नाजिज्म चल रहा था वहां पे. One refugee reported being classified as a non-national simply because his parents and brother had left the country. In some cases, people who were told that they were classified as genuine Bhutanese citizens have subsequently been deprived of citizenship on the basis of a decision by a local government official. See, what did I just say? भगाना वैसे भी है, कोई एक्सक्यूज चाहिए. कभी एक्ट है, कभी एक्ट नहीं है, कभी डिटेंशन है, डिटेंशन के बाद बोल रहा है कि अच्छा डिटेन नहीं होना है तो निकलो देश से. अब किसी को बोल रहा है कि अच्छा भाई बाप माँ निकल गया देश से तो तुम सिटीजन नहीं हो. जिसके पास सिटीजनशिप है, जो F1 भूटानी सिटीजन प्रमाण हो गया, उसको भी बोल रहा है कि नहीं तुम भी निकलो. क्योंकि हाँ, वैसे तो हमारा कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कोई है नहीं, हमको सिर्फ एक्सक्यूज चाहिए तुमको निकालने का. तुम्हारे ऊपर और कोई एक्सक्यूज नहीं काम कर रहा है तो अभी तुमको ऐसे ही निकाल देंगे. जो भी एक्सक्यूज हो, निकलना तो तुम्हें है ही. दैट इज द क्रक्स ऑफ द मैटर. In some cases, people who are people. This is not one single incident. People who were told that they were classified as genuine Bhutanese citizens, which is the F1 level of Bhutanese citizenship, have subsequently been deprived of citizenship on the basis of what? A decision by a local government official. Now, ये local government official कैसे काम कर रहा था? राजा का डर नहीं है उसके दिमाग में. So this means that the royal decree meant nothing. There was tacit support. कोई विस्पर कैंपेन करके नीचे से कोई इसको खबर पहुंचा रहा था कि दिस इज व्हाट द किंग वांट्स. After they were put, okay, local government official. In others, married couples have been forced to leave Bhutan after they were put in different categories by the census teams, even when one of them was confirmed as a Bhutanese citizen. जो कि नहीं करना था because this came under F2 or F3. F2 was F3 or F4, I think. One was if a non-national is married to a Bhutanese citizen, then you are a Bhutanese citizen. And दोनों लड़का और लड़की दोनों के बीच में ही. If a non-national man is married to a Bhutanese woman, then you are F3. If a non-national woman is married to a Bhutanese man, then you are F4. ऐसा कोई कैटेगरी था. तो यहाँ पे वो कैटेगरी फुलफिल हो रहा है, फिर भी निकाल दिया. वैसे एक्सक्यूज तो है कि तुम भूटानी नहीं हो, एक्सक्यूज ही यूज करना है. कोई लॉ वगैरह कुछ है नहीं. एवरीथिंग इज आर्बिट्ररी. द सेंसस इज नॉट आर्बिट्ररी. The idea is arbitrary, the census is arbitrary, the application is arbitrary, the arrests are arbitrary, the detention is arbitrary, the kicking out is arbitrary. Married couples have been forced to leave Bhutan after they were put in different categories by census teams, even when one of them was confirmed as a Bhutanese citizen. Pura couple ko hi nikal diya. In 1993, there were also reports that additional administrative obstacles, such as alterations to the way in which land deeds are numbered, have been placed in the way of ethnic Nepalis seeking to provide proof of land ownership to the census deed. अच्छा, जिसके पास land ownership का proof है, वो proof का law ही बदल दिया. ये तुम्हारा proof था कि अच्छा एक कागज दिखाएंगे कि ये जमीन मेरा है. अच्छा ये कागज में क्या लिखा है, उसका इंपॉर्टेंस ही चेंज हो गया. वो लैंड डीड्स का डीड रिकॉर्ड ही उसका वे ही चेंज हो गया, क्योंकि वैसे भी निकालना है. Another means by which ethnic Nepalis are being forced to leave the country, and a method cited by an increasing number of refugees during 1993, is the revocation of their citizenship under the provision of the 1985 Citizenship Act, जो कि पूरी तरह से arbitrary है. If you want to know why, you have to check out yesterday's live stream and today's live stream from the beginning. Under the provision of the 1985 Citizenship Act concerning citizens who have been, quote, shown by act or speech to be disloyal in any matter whatsoever to the country, king and people of Bhutan. Now, if anyone's joining the live stream right now, they might think that, yeah, this kind of seems like a legitimate thing, because why should someone be disloyal in any matter to the king, country and people of Bhutan? But this is just an excuse. For that, you'll have to check out the entire live stream from yesterday or today from the beginning. Because ये लोग किस चीज़ को डिसलॉयल टू किंग कंट्री पीपल ऑफ भूटान बोल रहे हैं? इंडिया के जैसा सिचुएशन नहीं है इनका. नेपाली भाषा बोलेगा, नेपाली कपड़ा पहनेगा. इससे ये लोग बोल रहे हैं कि दिस इज अ थ्रेट टू द किंग कंट्री पीपल ऑफ भूटान. ओके, दे वर नॉट डिमांडिंग अ सेपरेट स्टेट कंट्री, कुछ भी नहीं. भूटान से आज़ादी वाज़ादी नहीं मांग रहे थे. ऐसे ही सब रैंडमली आर्बिट्रेरीली शुरू कर दिया ये सब. टर्निंग द पेज नाउ. Refugees also report being coerced into signing so-called voluntary migration forms. यही बाकी रह गया था. कोई भी उपाय नहीं छोड़ा, सिर्फ एक बाकी रह गया था. अभी ये भी कर लिया कि ऐसे ही, और कोई एक्सक्यूज नहीं मिल रहा है तुमको निकालने को. तुम लिख दो कि तुमको निकलना है, तुम खुद से ही लिख दो. Coerced into signing so-called voluntary migration forms, stating that they are selling their land and leaving the country of their own free will, under the threat of large fines or imprisonment if they fail to comply. देखो, जहां पे लॉ है वहां लॉ अप्लाई करेंगे, जहां पे लॉ नहीं है वहां पे ये सब अप्लाई करेंगे. Many acknowledge that they did receive some compensation for their land, although others did not. अच्छा, किसी लोगों को compensation दिया क्योंकि वो लोकल बंदा, लोकल गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल्स थोड़ा दरिया दिल इंसान होगा. Large fines or imprisonment if they fail to comply. Many acknowledge that they did receive compensation for their land, although others did not, but almost all stress that any money received was well below the market value. अच्छा, तो 10,000 रुपए का जमीन 5,000 में देके बोला भागो यहाँ से, और किसी को वो भी नहीं दिया. More importantly though, they all confirm that they felt they had no choice but to sign the forms. Okay, this is not free market working कि अच्छा मुझे जमीन बेचना था, ऐसे ही मैं बेच के पूरा पैसा वैसा लेके बड़ा जमींदार बन के मैं निकल गया वहां से. They felt like they had no choice but to leave. रलीफ गलीफ चलीफ के अलावा ये क्या है? नाजी जर्मनी और कश्मीर का एक्सोडस में क्या डिफरेंस है? सिर्फ डिफरेंस है कि गैस चैम्बर में डाल के नहीं मारा और यहाँ पे गोली से नहीं उड़ा दिया. वैसे डिटेंशन सेंटर पे भी टॉर्चर करके भी मार दिया. वो क्राइटेरिया भी फुलफिल हो गया. So I see this as at par with Kashmir and Nazi Germany. Maybe not in terms of numbers. Numbers कम है, वो ही excuse है, which is why this part is this history of Bhutan is not known to people. और वैसे Jews don't let anyone forget what their history is. Nepali Bhutanese have not been so lucky because their Hindu brothers in India have been stupid fucks. We have not thought about them. We have not known about them. Many acknowledge that they did receive some compensation. More importantly, they all confirm that they felt they had no choice but to sign the forms. Occasionally, refugees report that they were videotaped signing the forms. One refugee said that after the camera was turned off, officials made various deductions which left him with no money. इतना इनोवेटिव वेज है लोगों को देश से निकालने का. कैमरा ऑन करके दिखाया कि देखो मैं तुम्हारा जमीन का पैसा दे रहा हूँ. कैमरा बंद हुआ, बोला कि नहीं ये इतना पैसा नहीं मिलेगा तुमको. Another refugee who was told during the census that he could not stay in the country because his brother had already left, वो फिर से वो excuse, said that a pistol was held against his back while he made a statement in front of the video saying that he would not return to Bhutan. कोई भी excuse नहीं छोड़ा. पीछे बंदूक लगा के बोला, बोलो कैमरा में कि मैं नहीं लौटूंगा यहाँ पे. Amnesty International reports that journalists and visitors to Bhutan have been shown videos of ethnic Nepalis signing the forms as proof that those involved left the country of their own volition. Human rights organizations report that the practice of the forced signing of voluntary migration forms continues. This continues up till 1995, at least because this paper was written in 1995. There are also reports of ethnic Nepalis being forced by the authorities to leave Bhutan in retaliation of criminal activities perpetrated by others. In some instances, interviewees described whole village blocks, a group of between 3 and 6 villages, usko block bola jata tha, village blocks of families who were recognized as Bhutanese citizens, being nonetheless forced out en masse, apparently in retaliation for a robbery or an attack on a local government official एट्रीब्यूटेड बाय अथॉरिटीज टू एंटीनेशनल एलिमेंट्स। अच्छा, अब जो कोई भी गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल पे कोई भी अटैक रॉबरी वगैरह होगा, उनके लिए जो कि लीगल भूटानी सिटीजन घोषित कर दिए गए हैं बाय सम रैंडम एक्ट ऑफ गॉड, उनको भी निकाला जा रहा है, क्योंकि वैसे भी एक्ट वैक्ट कुछ नहीं है। तुमको अगर लीगली भूटानी सिटीजन घोषित कर भी दिया गया है, तब भी तुम निकलोगे, निकलना तुमको है ही। ऑन अ डे टू डे बेसिस, ethnic Nepalis are also liable to be subjected to lower level harassment, such as the repeated checking of documents. For example, during December 1993, there were reports of security forces visiting houses of Galekphug, Sarbang district at night and demanding to check identification documents. And you know why? For people joining the live stream right now, because the police were incentivized to do this. उनको बोला गया कि तुम 50% of the fines तुम रखो, जो कि इंडिया का पुलिस इलीगली करता है, वो उसको लीगली बोल दिया कि जितना फाइन करोगे, जितने लोगों को हैरास करोगे, उसमें तुम्हारा ही मजा है, क्योंकि 50% ऑफ द फाइन तुमको रखना पड़ेगा। तुम रख सकते हो, अच्छा है, तुम करो ये सब। As the number of ethnic Nepalis who have left Bhutan has increased, so the depopulation of villages in the south of the country has become an increasingly serious problem for those who remain. Without community support, ये तो सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है हिंदुओं का, without community support, such as the joint maintenance of irrigation canals, and assistance with sowing and harvesting, and the lack of common security against criminals, it can be extremely difficult for isolated households to survive on their own, with the result that in some cases they opt to leave and seek refuge in Nepal. अच्छा, ये तो सबसे वैसे भी peaceful way of leaving the country है। Although depopulation is causing considerable hardship for ethnic Nepalis in southern Bhutan, the government's response through the settlement of northern Bhutanese in areas formerly inhabited by ethnic Nepalis is a matter of some concern, and could have serious implications for any future repatriation program. Resettlement does not yet appear to be happening on a large scale. अच्छा, थोड़ा repatriation, थोड़ा resettlement भी शुरू किया, दिमाग ठिकाने पे है नहीं, रैंडमली जो एक दिन एक रैंडम मूड हो रहा है, बाइपोलर है, तब वैसा काम कर रहा है। बट देर इज एविडेंस दैट, अच्छा रीसेटलमेंट करना ही था तो निकाला क्यों, अजीब आदमी है। बट देर इज एविडेंस दैट रीसेटलमेंट इज ऑलरेडी टेकिंग प्लेस इन सम पार्ट्स ऑफ सदर्न भूटान, फॉर एग्जाम्पल इन सामद्रुप जोंगखाट डिस्ट्रिक्ट। तो ये 1995 का पेपर है, ये कितना इफेक्टिव हुआ है आजकल के लिए, उसके लिए कुछ अगर अलग पेपर पढ़ना पड़ेगा। देयर हैव ऑल्सो बीन रिपोर्ट्स दैट लैंड इन सामद्रुप जोंगखाट, चिरांग एंड सामची डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स left vacant by ethnic Nepalis who have sought refuge in Nepal is being made available to northern Bhutanese at very low prices. Acha, the statement by the Home Minister in the 1993 session of the National Assembly, when he confirmed that a nationwide survey of suitable land for resettlement of landless people was then in progress, indicates that the government plans to increase the rate of resettlement. इसको कैसे बिलीव करे, निकाला तो arbitrarily, अब arbitrarily resettlement का बात दिया तो कैसे भरोसा करे। अच्छा, अभय बोल रहा है कि कोलकाता ट्रैफिक पुलिस इज द मिनी वर्जन ऑफ दिस। यस, वंडरफुल लाइफ इज सेइंग resettlement is for northern Bhutanese and Nepali ethnic land, not of resettlement of Nepali. अच्छा, तो ये resettlement करके भी क्या होगा, तो ये resettlement किसको समझाने के लिए कर रहा है, अजीब आदमी है। Resettlement of northern Bhutanese in Nepali ethnic land. It is about settling of Drukpa Buddhists in the south. Wow. Okay, thank you for clarifying this. That is what I was thinking. Settlement of northern Bhutanese in areas formerly inhabited by ethnic Nepalis is a matter of some concern. कहाँ से, ये तो matter of very much concern है, ये some concern बोल दिया इसलिए मैंने सोचा कि ये तो नेपाली को resettlement कर रहा है। And could have serious implications for any future repatriation program. Yes, वो घर वो लौटेगा भी कहाँ से, वो जहाँ पे लौटेगा वहाँ पे ऑलरेडी नॉर्दर्न भूटानीज को दे दिया जाएगा। अच्छा, रीसेटलमेंट लार्ज स्केल में नहीं हो रहा है मगर छोटे मोटे स्केल में हो रहा है। हाँ, ये तो होना ही है वैसे, क्योंकि रीसेटलमेंट करने के लिए भी तो लोग चाहिए, जिसका नॉर्थ भूटान में ऑलरेडी सेटल डाउन घर विलेज है, वो भी खामखा के अचानक साउथ भूटान में क्यों जिंदगी बिताएगा। अच्छा, और कहाँ पे हो रहा है, देयर हैव ऑल्सो बीन रिपोर्ट्स दैट लैंड इन सामद्रुप जोंगखाट, चिरांग एंड सामची डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स left vacant by ethnic Nepalis who have sought refuge in Nepal is being made available to northern Bhutanese. Yes, population displacement. Their land was given to Drukpa Buddhists. Yes. Yeah, so I got this. I understood this paragraph a bit wrong. Thanks for clarifying this. So nothing good is happening. I thought some good things are happening finally as an excuse. अब पता चल रहा है कि no, even that was not happening. जो लोग नेपाली लोग जो अपना घर छोड़ के चले गए, वो घर वो ज़मीन भी बुद्धिस्ट को दिया जा रहा है भूटान के. Denial of public services. A number of other government initiatives that discriminate against ethnic Nepali southern Bhutanese have created additional hardship for them since the 1990 demonstrations. Many of these are still in operation today, that is in 1995 when the paper is being written. One of the most controversial of these initiatives was the introduction of the so-called no objection certificates, NOCs, documents issued by the police which confirm that the bearer has no involvement in anti-national activity. Following the unrest in the south of the country prompted by the census operation and the government's Bhutanization policies, possession of an NOC became mandatory for ethnic Nepalis who wished to gain admission to schools, be eligible for scholarships, to study outside Bhutan, get jobs in the civil service and places on training courses, as well as in order to obtain business and trading licenses and travel documents. ये सब बंद है इनके लिए. Farmers are also required an NOC in order to access their earnings from cash crops. नहीं तो पैसा भी नहीं मिलेगा cash crops से. The sale of which is government controlled. Refugees report that it was virtually impossible for ethnic Nepali southern Bhutanese to obtain NOCs. अच्छा, फिर देखो random excuse ऐसे ही harass करने का. बोल रहा है कि NOC दो तब ये सब facilities तुमको मिलेगा. मगर नेपाली एथनिक नेपाली रिफ्यूजी बोल रहा है और जो विक्टिम है वो बोल रहा है कि अरे एनओसी देता ही नहीं है किसी को. द गवर्नमेंट क्लेम्स दैट ऑन कमांड ऑफ द किंग द एनओसी रिक्वायरमेंट फॉर स्कूल एडमिशंस वाज ड्रॉप्ड इन 1992. हाउएवर द एनओसी इज स्टिल रिपोर्टेड टू बी रिक्वायर्ड फॉर एथनिक नेपालीज सीकिंग गवर्नमेंट एम्प्लॉयमेंट एंड ट्रेनिंग और टू ट्रैवल अब्रॉड. घूमने भी नहीं जा सकते, तुमको एनओसी दिखाना है. एनओसी कहां से मिलेगा? नहीं मिलेगा. Ethnic Nepalis are also said to be denied the necessary documents to enable them to travel within the country, thereby denying them educational and employment opportunities. तुम गांव में हो, गांव में रहो, उधर से तुम निकल नहीं सकते. This is worse than Islamic countries. Yes, Abhay is right. Neo-Buddhists be like, this must be done by Brahmins. Rohan is right. ये कि वो अम्बेडकराइट को दिखाओ, वो बोलेगा ये भी ब्राह्मण पंडितों ने आके किया है. Okay, Wonderful Life is saying actually Nepali Brahmins were targeted the most. Yeah, ये तो होना है. अरे yesterday someone asked संजय दीक्षित के वो न्यू बुद्धिस्ट ऐसे क्यों सोचते हैं. संजय दीक्षित ने कहा कि अरे भाई उनका अध्ययन बहुत कम है, किसी को कुछ पढ़ाई वढ़ाई नहीं है बुद्धिज्म के बारे में, बुद्धा के बारे में, अम्बेडकर के बारे में, कुछ चीज़ में उनका कुछ पढ़ाई नहीं है. ऐसे ही किसी को गाली देना है, हिंदुओं को गाली देना है, ब्राह्मण को गाली देना है, ऐसे ही दे रहा है बैठ के. Okay. Enable them to travel. Okay. It is unclear to what extent public services in the south of the country, many of which were suspended in the wake of the 1990 demonstrations, have been restored, as government statistics on this are challenged by refugee groups. ये government का statistics हम क्या भरोसा, ये तो चाइना है, चाइना गवर्नमेंट है. रैंडमली हर 10 साल में रूल बनाता है, वो रूल अप्लाई भी नहीं करता है, वो रूल के अलावा भी जो दिमाग में आए वो अप्लाई करता है. इसका स्टैटिस्टिक्स हम क्या विश्वास करें. मुझे ही विश्वास नहीं हो रहा है, वो रिफ्यूजी तो विश्वास नहीं करेगा. रिफ्यूजी तो ऑब्वियसली डिस्प्यूट करेगा ही. फॉर एग्जांपल, एज ऑफ मिड 1993 द गवर्नमेंट क्लेम्ड दैट 64 schools had been reopened, but refugee sources claim that only 24 schools were then in operation. According to these sources, of the 24, 9 are in parts of the south without ethnic populations. वाह, नेपाली है ही नहीं, वो जगह का स्कूल रिओपन करके बड़ा झंडे कर रहा था. While admission to the remainder is said to be restricted to children of members of the security forces, government officials, etc. उनके बेटों के लिए, बच्चों के लिए वो स्कूल खोल दिया. Okay, check out the comment section what Wonderful Life is saying. Bahuns, who are Nepali Brahmins, were forced to eat beef in prison. Those who wear tilak. लो, अब जो न्यू बुद्धिस्ट है उनको ये वीडियो भी उसके मुंह पे मारना होगा. Now Nepal Bhutan talks. देखते हैं. Let me have a sip of coffee. Talks between the governments of Bhutan and Nepal on the refugee issues have been continuing since November 1992. Although progress has been slow, and the signs are that it has by and large been Nepal that has made the necessary concessions necessary to keep the talks going. Low. Nepal has done the concessions. कि नहीं नहीं अच्छा अच्छा देखो तुमको क्या चाहिए बोलो, at least don't harm our people. नेपाल हिंदू किंग है, हिंदू किंग था, mysteriously that's why they appear to be the better person, the bigger man in the argument. The first major breakthrough in the talks occurred in July 1993 when a joint statement was signed announcing the formation of a 6-member joint ministerial level committee. The joint statement gave the committee the mandate to quote unquote determine the different categories of people in the refugee camps who are claiming to have come from Bhutan, and to quote arrive at a mutually acceptable agreement on each category which will provide a basis for the resolution of the problem, end quote. It took a further 2 months before the committee members were announced. Progress since then has been disappointing. अच्छा अच्छा वाह, concession दिया फिर भी progress disappointing हुआ. This is what India has also done all these years. Do you notice the similarity in the actions of these two Hindu kings, in the actions of these two Hindu countries? हम 1 इंच कंसेशन पहले ही दे देंगे ये सोच के कि अच्छा एक अच्छा फैसला आएगा, एक अच्छा कोऑपरेशन बनेगा, और या फिर हमको 2 इंच का जगह हम एक साथ कोलैबोरेट करेंगे उस पर. मगर ये 1 इंच देने से कुछ काम नहीं होता है. पहले तुमको बोल ऑफेंस इज ऑलवेज द बेस्ट डिफेंस, ये हिंदुओं को सीखना होगा. Which will provide a basis for resolution. It took a further 2 months before the committee members were announced. Progress has been disappointing. Even though Nepal gave the concessions in the first place. The first meeting of the Bhutan-Nepal Joint Ministerial Level Committee, headed by the Home ministers from both countries, took place in Kathmandu in October 1993. इसको काठमांडू में घुसने क्यों दिया? At the meeting, the two sides agreed that all the people in the refugee camps in Nepal would be grouped into one of 4 categories. Since then, there have been 3 more joint ministerial meetings in February, April, and June 1994. But little concrete progress has been made. The government of Bhutan has refused to agree to Nepal's proposal. The government of Bhutan has refused to agree to Nepal's proposal that an independent panel be set up to categorize the refugees, even though Nepal ने पहले ही concession दे दिया ये discussion करने के लिए, okay? उसके बाद ये हो रहा है. The government of Bhutan has refused to agree to Nepal's proposal that an independent panel be set up to categorize the refugees, and instead, a bilateral joint verification team is to be established. As yet, however, no agreement has been reached about the criteria that will be used to categorize the refugees. क्या कैटेगरी, क्या क्राइटेरिया होगा कैटेगरी का, उसमें कोई कंसेंसस नहीं हुआ है. कैसे होगा? ये सब तो पागलों की तरह हर सुबह नया नया लॉज और एक्ट्स बनाते हैं, तो उनको ये कोई अग्रीमेंट कहाँ से कुछ लगेगा. अगर ये अग्रीमेंट्स करते भी थे तो भी 3 दिन बाद बोल सकते थे कि नहीं नहीं नेपाल के साथ जो हुआ काठमांडू में हुआ, व्हाट हैपेंस इन काठमांडू स्टेज इन काठमांडू, भूटान में अलग लॉ चलेगा, ये भी बोल सकते थे. दिस इज एन एब्सोल्युटली नॉन ट्रस्टेबल गवर्नमेंट. देयर इज एब्सोल्युटली नो स्टेबिलिटी इन देयर थॉट प्रोसेस. The government has refused to agree to Nepal's proposal that an independent panel be set up. As yet, however, no agreement has been reached about the criteria that will be used to categorize the refugees. Criteria क्या होगा उस पे ही कोई consensus नहीं बना. And the 5th meeting, scheduled for September 1994, was postponed because of general elections in Nepal held in November. A 6th meeting of bilateral talks, which was held in April 1995, concluded without an agreed date for the next meeting. The 4 categories of refugees that have been agreed are bona fide Bhutanese, if they have been evicted forcefully. तो if they have been evicted forcefully, ये तो भूटान को एडमिट करना पड़ेगा, तब तो ये जाके घोषित होंगे कि they have been evicted forcefully. Bhutanese who immigrated, अच्छा, they have not been emigrating forcefully, they have been emigrating ऐसे ही मजा आया इसलिए. Non-Bhutanese, Bhutanese who have committed criminal acts. All this 3 out of 4 are related to one another. Refugee groups and human rights organizations have expressed serious reservations about the agreement on categorization that has been reached between the two governments and about the methods that appear likely to be used to implement it. Yes, exactly what I just realized myself. ये category तो घटिया है. If eligibility for return is based on Bhutanese citizenship laws, and the nature of the 4 categories clearly implies that this is so, this will certainly raise serious problems. not least because some of the provisions contained in Bhutan citizenship laws conflict with international law. हाँ हाँ, उनका जो citizenship law है वो ही तो 10-15 सालों में बदलते रहता है, और जो कि खुद बहुत ही arbitrary है. And it's not like the nature of their arbitrariness even remains uniform. Every 10-15 years they create a new arbitrary law. तो वो कैसे इंटरनेशनल लॉ के साथ उसका कोई पैरिटी कैसे रहेगा? Therefore, if Bhutan's domestic laws are used to define eligibility, they are likely to result in people who are entitled under international law to return to their own country. For example, those who signed the voluntary migration forms and so-called anti-nationals, who would presumably be placed in category 2 and 4 respectively, they will find themselves denied citizenship, and therefore they will be denied the right to return to the country. Clarification of the criteria to be used to classify refugees into the 4 groups must therefore be sought at the earliest opportunity. Even as far as category 1 is concerned, जो कि bona fide Bhutanese है, but they have been evicted forcefully, there is no clarity about the criteria that will be used to determine who will be defined as belonging to this category. हाँ, ये bona fide Bhutanese कैसे categorize होगा? हाँ, अगर कोई bona fide Bhutanese होता कोई नेपाली तो उसको निकालता ही नहीं. bona fide Bhutanese नहीं था, ऐसा नेपाली कौन था? निकाला तो सब नेपाली को. और ये एविक्टेड फोर्सफुली, ये एडमिट कैसे करेगा भूटान? ये एडमिट करेगा तब तो वॉर क्रिमिनल है, तब तो उसको इन्वेड ही करना है. इवन एज इफ द क्राइटेरिया आर द सेम एज दोज यूज्ड ड्यूरिंग द सेंसस ऑपरेशन टू डिफाइन सिटीजनशिप. हाँ, अगर वही सेम कैटेगरी यूज हो गया जो कि सेंसस ऑपरेशन, जो कि अजीबोगरीब सेंसस ऑपरेशन होता था फ्रॉम द 58 और द 85, 77 एटसेट्रा, वही अगर यूज हो गया, इफ द क्राइटेरिया आर द सेम एज those used during the census operation to define citizenship, then all the problems associated with that will arise again. Exact same जो चीज करके ये प्रॉब्लम खड़ा हुआ, प्रॉब्लम का सोल्यूशन भी बोल रहा है कि वो हम सेम चीजें अप्लाई करेंगे यहाँ पे. Indeed, the difficulties will be compounded for refugees, many of whom have what documentation they possessed confiscated prior to leaving the country. जिनके पास documents था वो तो confiscate हो गया, अब बाकी भी कुछ नहीं है. Finally, if Bhutanese law is used to determine eligibility for return to Bhutan, a crucial question that needs to be addressed is what will happen to ethnic Nepali southern Bhutanese who are denied the right to return and who will have no claim to nationality or right to live in any other country. क्योंकि Bhutanese law तो कोई meaningless है, तो जो कि रिटर्न नहीं कर पाएंगे उनका क्या होगा? There is thus a very large danger that the process as it stands now is likely to result in a large number of refugees being rendered stateless. Okay, now Vinay Singh is saying, what about holy Japanese case? I don't know. Our culture always ruined in front of foreigners. Yes. But Bhutan is the happiest country in the world. Yes, happiness यहाँ से निकला है. Conclusion: the slow pace of progress of the Nepal-Bhutan government talks means that there is still some way to go before an end to the refugee crisis will be in sight. However, the situation as it stands leaves considerable room for an unsatisfactory resolution to the crisis unless certain key issues are addressed. हाँ, key issues ही address नहीं हुआ है. Eligibility criteria क्या है? लीगल सिटीजन कौन है? नेपाली होके भी लीगल सिटीजन कैसे हो सकता है? ये सब में क्लैरिटी ही नहीं है. ये बोल रहा है कि हाँ हमने तो डिस्कस कर लिया है, कुछ लोगों को हम रहने देंगे भूटान में. फर्स्ट, एज फार एज द रिफ्यूजीज इन नेपाल आर कंसर्न्ड, द प्रायोरिटी मस्ट बी टू क्लैरिफाई द कैटेगराइजेशन प्रोसेस agreed by the Bhutan and Nepal governments before any screening of refugee begins, and to ensure that eligibility will be defined according to international law and not simply in accordance with the random arbitrary Bhutanese domestic legislation. However, for as long as talks continue on a bilateral basis only, it is questionable whether this will be achieved. क्योंकि कोई थर्ड पार्टी इंटरवेंशन चाहिए, थर्ड पार्टी मीडिएटर चाहिए. भूटान seems to be under no great pressure. यही तो मेन प्रॉब्लम है. This is the crux of the issue. Bhutan is under no great pressure and is therefore in no great rush to resolve the matter, while Nepal would no doubt like to see the refugee crisis solved as soon as possible. If a third party were introduced into the equation, there is a chance that further backsliding could be avoided and a fair and safe resolution to the crisis would be achieved. The government of Nepal has since talks with Bhutan on the matter began, indicated that it would seek India's good offices to resolve the issue in the event that Nepal and Bhutan were unable to resolve the matter bilaterally, and this was reiterated in October 1994 by the then Prime Minister of Nepal, गिरिजा प्रसाद कोइराला. ये कैसे होगा 1994 में? इंडिया में 90s में हर 6 महीने में प्राइम मिनिस्टर बदल रहा है, because we did not have electoral autocracy. Most observers argue that India holds the key to the solution of the crisis. Yes, why? Because India is a Hindu majority country. इंडिया का जो हिंदू राष्ट्र कैरेक्टर है वो अब यहाँ पे सोल्यूशन है, ये स्कॉलर को भी लग रहा है unknowingly. However, it does not appear that India is prepared to get involved. कैसे होगा prepared to involved? हर 6 महीने में उसका प्रधानमंत्री बदल रहा है, ऐसे 50 पार्टी का कोलिशन बना के चला रहा है गवर्नमेंट, इसलिए. It does not appear that India is prepared to get involved, and indeed, it has repeatedly stressed that it regards the issue as a bilateral one to be sorted out by the governments of Bhutan and Nepal. What the? देखो, इसलिए इंडिया का हिंदू कैरेक्टर का क्लैरिटी होना जरूरी है. क्यों जरूरी है? इंडिया के दिमाग में, वो सेक्युलर गवर्नमेंट का दिमाग में घुस नहीं रहा है कि ये सिर्फ भूटान और नेपाल का इशू नहीं है, ये हिंदुओं का इशू है. हिंदुओं का इशू who are being victimized just because of being Hindu or just because of being Nepali, however way you choose to look at it. It's a racial issue that's happening with your people who are part of your civilizational state, and people who are ethnically from the country who is also one of your best friends, Nepal. नेपाल के साथ हमारा बॉर्डर पोरस है, किसी को आने जाने में कोई रोक भी नहीं है. उस देश के आदमियों के साथ ये सब हो रहा है, और इंडिया का तब का गवर्नमेंट बोल रहा है कि इट्स बिटवीन भूटान एंड नेपाल, हमको क्या करना है, हमको तो सेक्युलरिज्म देखना है. A solution to the issue at hand may thus be to engage the involvement of either a third government to act as arbiter or an independent third और एक मिनट, ये पेज कहाँ पे स्क्रॉल डाउन नहीं हो रहा है. I think I scrolled too much. Or an independent third party to act as intermediary. और इसके लिए बेस्ट कैंडिडेट था इंडिया, और इंडिया ने हाथ उठा दिया. Even if this were to occur, and in the event that a determination process gets underway that accords with international law, the matter of the human rights situation in Bhutan still needs to be resolved. From the evidence of refugees arriving in the camps, it is clear that the persecution of ethnic Nepalis by the Bhutanese authorities continues. Before any of the refugees are repatriated, it seems imperative that the government of Bhutan undertakes to end state-sanctioned persecution and to offer guarantees for the safety and security of returning refugees and of ethnic Nepalis who remain in the country. Before repatriation begins, the problems associated with the ongoing census operation बंद नहीं कर रहा है, ये बोल रहा है कि हाँ ठीक है, हम तो टॉक्स में बैठे हैं, हम ले लेंगे रिफ्यूजीज. वो census operation is the core, is the source of all these problems, क्योंकि that was so arbitrary. Before repatriation begins, the problems associated with the ongoing census operation should also be addressed, and there should be an immediate halt to continuing forcible eviction of ethnic Nepalis. The resettlement of northern Bhutanese in areas formerly inhabited by the refugees should also cease. हाँ, जो कि निकल गए हैं देश से, जिनको भूटान लेने का नाटक कर रहा है वापस, उसका जमीन वैसे भी है कहाँ पे? उसका जमीन तो नॉर्दर्न भूटानीज को दे दिया गया. The resettlement of northern Bhutanese in area, इसको resettlement क्यों बोल रहा है? It's not like northern Bhutanese were living there previously before the southern Nepali Bhutanese. This resettlement word is very confusing and absolutely unacceptable. The resettlement of northern Bhutanese in areas formerly inhabited by the refugees should also cease. Yes, ये cease नहीं होगा तो वो return करके भी क्या करेंगे? So this paper is from 1995, so I'm not sure what the situation is today. The people who are here, the descendants of these people, they will be better at explaining these things. So this is where the live stream ends today, guys. I'll continue with this discussion in other live streams as well, because I have found 3 or 4 other papers. ये देख लो, और भी लेटेस्ट जो इन्फो है वो भी हमें देखना है. ये देखो, एक पेपर है यहाँ पे, भूटानीज रेफ्यूजीज इन नेपाल एन एनालिसिस, ये 2005 का है, 10 साल के बाद का. वहाँ पे हमको अपडेट मिलेगा कि 10 साल बाद क्या सिचुएशन था. और एक है भूटान द इशू ऑफ एथनिक डिवाइड, ये 1995 का है। एथनिक क्राइसिस इन भूटान, ये 2001 का है। तो ये 2001 और 2005 का पेपर भी हम डिस्कस करेंगे कभी ना कभी, और इन दिस वीक ऑन सम टाइम नेक्स्ट वीक. So after that we will continue with those papers. And thanks for joining this live stream, and thanks a lot for recommending this paper because we did not know about these things. Okay, good night guys. See you as soon as possible in the next live stream.